Okay, in this video, I just want to go over a few things about um, shading, using values, gradients, and like what you're actually doing when you're shading something. Because often you don't really think too much about it because the process is really simple. The process you just basically are, it's the act of drawing and just rubbing. Um, the tip of the pencil on paper, and what that does, it kind of rubs off the particles and kind of mixes it with the surface of the paper. Kind of gets into the fibers, and that's what makes it look darker anyways. Because the light kind of gets absorbed in the particles that you've rubbed onto the paper. And the white paper reflects the light, and the particles from the pencil kind of absorb the light so that you don't see the white tone there. But anyways, the less you rub it, the lighter the shade looks because there's less particles there blocking the light, basically, or absorbing the light. You don't necessarily think about this when you're drawing, but it's kind of interesting to kind of understand it a little bit. And that way you kind of become more aware of what you're doing and kind of maybe learn to control it in different ways, or take advantage of the characteristics that it provides. So, when you vary the pressure as you're rubbing on the piece of paper, and the harder you push, the more particles are getting rubbed off, so the darker it becomes, and the lighter you push, the less is being rubbed off. And so the shade appears lighter. So, if you're just starting out drawing, it can be a little bit of an exercise to kind of control how much pressure you are applying to the paper. Some people, if they're just starting out drawing, they either press really hard all the time, or they don't press hard enough and they kind of are just kind of not pressing at all. And so it takes a little bit of control to be able to kind of vary that and kind of go from like pressing hard to pressing light, so that you can get the whole transition of values that that your tools provide. And some of your tools might not be able to get like super dark shades. You might have to rely on other kinds of materials like charcoal. In charcoal, you can have a much darker value. So as you can see here, it's kind of gray, like it's kind of grayish, but if I press with the charcoal, it gets much darker, as you can see. Maybe if I lighten that up a bit. See, so different tools provide, different characteristics. Charcoal is much darker than, the graphite from your pencil. As if you look at the tip of your pencil, it's very metallic, and so it's not black. So you shouldn't expect to get like a super black tone. So yeah, that covers pretty much the values. When you think of a value, it's basically a mixture of black and white. and which gives you a gray, and there's pretty much an unlimited amount of grays, because you get an unlimited percentage of black versus white. But you know, there's other ways of tricking your mind into believing that it's seeing a darker value. Because if you just draw a line, it's one value. See, if you make all these lines the same value, then you start concentrating the lines. This area continues to appear as if it's getting darker, even though you're applying the same value. So I can go this way too, cross hatch it. It's all the same value basically, but I'm just kind of concentrating the darkness and kind of covering up the paper. It's the same thing as just rubbing the pencil, even though when you do this you don't necessarily see any lines there because the lines are all kind of concentrated together, just as I was doing it right here. So, you know, is there really a line there when I draw a line? It looks as if there's a line there, but all that I'm really doing is creating a bunch of little particles that have been kind of rubbed off and kind of caught within the fibers of the paper. You know, that's all. If I were to magnify, you know, this, you'd just see little tiny particles from the graphite or the charcoal. You kind of see right here, there's little particles that have been rubbed off from the charcoal. And so that's basically what you're doing when you're mixing black and white. You're just kind of mixing it. So yeah, there's different ways that you can shade something. It doesn't necessarily have to just be, you know, the standard way where you're kind of going back and forth, applying different pressures. Sure, that this is a good technique, but there's other techniques. For instance, you could use shapes and just concentrate the shapes more closely together, and it appears darker on this side versus this other side where the shapes are less concentrated. Also, you could have, you know, something that's more organic looking, that has you know, less rigid shapes, just kind of random, and the more concentrated you put them together, the more dark it becomes because less of the paper is being shown, whereas on this side more of the paper is being shown relative to the shapes. So this side looks lighter, this side looks darker, and there's a transition there. And so, you know, another way that you can kind of think about it is, you know, your eyes kind of feel the blacks and whites, and the fluctuations between them, because it has to sense how much light is getting into your eye. And so if you're, you know, applying a lot of dark tones, less light is bouncing from this area because it's becoming absorbed, and so less light is getting into your eye. So as your eye kind of scans across the page, the rods and cones in your eyes will, as soon as it reaches this point, it'll feel a fluctuation in the amount of light that it's receiving. And so it senses a dark versus a light there, and kind of gets drawn towards the edges of the lights and darks and tries to find the value there, the transition, the gray. And so it kind of wants to fall into that, the space that is kind of unstable, the space that isn't solid, or that isn't kind of pure. It kind of gets caught in the impurities of reality, of what you're perceiving, and kind of it tries to figure out what's there, because it's not easy to see, because there's multiple things being mixed together, basically. But yeah, I kind of went on a tangent there, even though it's kind of interesting. But basically, these are some things that you can think about